Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out the drum mystery in the Beatles' most beautiful song, Dear Prudence.
Dear Prudence is one of the most beautiful songs in the entire Beatles canon.
Dear Prudence.
Within the song's many captivating layers, however, is an odd anomaly that has been a source of dispute for decades among Beatle fans.
John's handwriting looks like he wrote it with his foot.
In this episode, I'm going to explore that anomaly and explain why the song's special quality may be due to what's missing. As a fair warning, once I point it out, you can't unhear this.
What is it?
Dear Prudence appears as the second...
Y'all, we all love the song Dear Prudence. If you've watched this channel before, you know I love the Beatles, regardless of their mainstream appeal, even though I have an irreverent outlook on things that have mass appeal. The Beatles is the thing that, I should say the music of the Beatles, gets my blood flowing, if you know what I'm saying.
You can't unhear this.
Warning.
Dear Prudence appears as the second song on the Beatles' self-titled 1968 masterpiece, known as the White Album. Composed by John Lennon during the band's 1968 visit to India, the song was written for a very specific Prudence, Mia Farrow's sister, who had joined the group on their spiritual excursion, but had, in John's view at least, become a bit too entranced by meditation. And so he composed a musical plea for her to come out and play. Although written during the India trip, the song was first recorded on a set of tapes known as the Esher demos, named after the location of George Harrison's estate, where the group had convened in May 1968 to collect some of their new song ideas following the India trip.
Y'all, you can listen to all of those Esher, I think it's Esher, not Esher. It might be Esher, I don't know. You can listen to all those demos on the 2018 remix. I think it's 2018. Let's see. I want to give you the right information. That's why you come to this channel, for the correct information, right? You can't trust the news organizations anymore. 2018 remix, there it is. And remaster, Super Deluxe Edition. You can listen to all these demos. Look at this. Back in the USR. Esher demo.
Wait so long I hardly knew.
It's just acoustic guitars. It's kind of like the White Album unplugged. It's great. Anyway, back to the video.
This acoustic demo, much like the final song, centers around a finger-picking style that John picked up from fellow musician Donovan, another guest on the infamous India jaunt.
Right. Donovan.
The version we know today, however...
What's Donovan all about, y'all? Catch the wind.
In the chilly hours and minutes.
Sounds like Bob Dylan to me. Moving on.
The version we know today, however, was recorded 3 months later in August 1968 during the official sessions for what would become the White Album. But there's a couple of anomalies that make this recording rather special. Firstly, it wasn't recorded at EMI Studios, the usual home where the Beatles had developed and recorded the vast majority of their songs.
Really?
Instead, the group moved over to Trident Studios, a spot in Soho where the Beatles had recently recorded their landmark single, Hey Jude. Trident offered one main alluring advantage over EMI. A then state-of-the-art 8-track recorder, which would allow the group to more easily add layers such as instruments, vocals, or sound effects.
Y'all, it's so crazy that EMI only had 4-track tape machines. Even at that point, EMI, come on. The reason is because EMI had this policy about gear. Any equipment that came into the studio to be used had to be taken apart bit by bit so the engineers could learn how it worked, and then they'd put it back together. That takes forever. Can you imagine taking apart a tape machine and putting it back together? I can't. And I'm an audio engineer. I wouldn't even dare. I think the term engineer is thrown around a little more loosely these days.
Allow the group to more easily add layers such as instruments, vocals, or sound effects.
Also, in America, 8-track was the standard by then. Years before then, the Beach Boys were using 8-track tape machines, you know? EMI, come on.
EMI Studios, meanwhile, was still using 4-track equipment, practically the same setup the band had worked with for almost 5 years. Not coincidentally, an 8-track recorder would very soon appear at EMI, thanks to, of course, the insistence of the Beatles.
Oh. So the Beatles had to give you an ultimatum and go to another lover before you relinquished and got an 8-track tape machine. EMI. Come on.
In addition to being in a different venue, the other major anomaly that week was that the Beatles weren't the Fab Four, but only the Fab Three.
Ringo quit.
On August 22nd, during a recording session for Back in the USSR, Ringo Starr stormed out of EMI Studios, allegedly after receiving one too many instructions from Paul about how he wanted a drum part to be played.
Paul.
The incident wasn't isolated. It was the breaking point following an increasingly tense and disjointed atmosphere during recent sessions.
The meditation didn't work.
Frustrated and exhausted, Ringo fled to the Mediterranean with his
Ringo.
family for some much-needed rest and recuperation.
Mediterranean, nice.
Meanwhile,
nice.
the other 3 Beatles simply continued on without him, with Paul stepping in on drums during the remainder of the sessions for Back in the USSR. They finished the song the next day, Ringo still absent. Almost a week later, on August 28th, with no sign of Ringo's return, John, Paul, and George reassembled, this time at Trident Studios, to continue working on material for the new album.
Isn't that wild? They just kept going. Ringo left. They just kept going. Yo, it's Ringo. It's your boy. Things must have been really f***ed up for Ringo to just be able to leave, and the rest of them were like, all right, whatever. No big deal. Paul can play the drums. It's not the same. It's not the same. Ringo is so solid. Paul's solid too, but Ringo's so solid. You know what I'm saying?
The trio spent 3 days laboring over John's new track, Dear Prudence.
3 days.
On the 28th, they recorded a suitable backing track led by John's finger-picked guitar. George Harrison contributed a second guitar, and, in Ringo's absence, Paul added some drums, just as he had done a week earlier on Back in the USSR. The next day, August 29th, the group gathered again to overdub a plethora of new parts, including John's haunting double-tracked lead vocal.
The sun is up, the sky is blue, it's beautiful, and so are you, dear Prudence.
The mesmerizing harmony vocals.
Round, 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 round.
Some Indian-inspired flourishes on electric guitar.
Oh, yeah.
And Paul's treble-cranked bass guitar, which was the focal point of an illuminating segment in the McCartney 3-2-1 miniseries.
We use a pick, then you get that very treble end.
Making full use of their 8-track setup at Trident, they continued to add in even more parts, such as tambourine and hand claps, contributed by Beatle roadie Mal Evans, Paul's cousin John McCartney, and Apple recording artist Jackie Lomax. Left out of the final version was a very well-deserved round of applause.
Did I just do the last verse?
There's even a funny quirk hidden within the isolated bass track. Finally, on Friday, August 30th, they finished off the song in a final evening session at Trident, with some last-minute touches from Paul on.
There's someone whispering cowbell. 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 Who's whispering cowbell? Bruce Dickinson, that's who.
Finally, on Friday, August 30th, they finished off the song in a final evening session at Trident, with some last-minute touches from Paul on piano. And perhaps most oddly, a flugelhorn. With that, the densely layered recording of Dear Prudence was complete.
Won't you come out to play?
After the weekend, the band would meet again, this time back at their home, EMI, to move on to a new song,
1, 2, 3.
Oh.
While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which marked the official return of Ringo Starr back into the Beatles.
Right.
Or
Yeah.
was it? Let's listen very carefully to the drum
it
part
was.
on Dear Prudence. You'll notice that there are 2 very distinct sections. From the beginning of the song until around the 2-minute 45-second mark.
What?
The drum part is fairly straightforward.
Okay.
Then,
hear
at around
2.
2 minutes 45 seconds, it suddenly takes on an entirely different quality, a psychedelic explosion of wild fills, triplets, and more. Here's where it gets really interesting. Listen to the isolated vocal track. You can hear that there was originally a different, simpler drum part in this latter section, likely recorded during the backing track and spilling over here into the other microphones.
Oh, won't you come out to play? Dear Prudence, greet the brand new day.
Because the drums in the final version of this section are different, we can safely assume that they were added later on.
Interesting. That original drum track is just holding down the groove. Boom, boom, ka, boom, boom, ka, boom, 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 ka. That might be Ringo.
Even more interestingly, the sound of the drum kit changes halfway through this latter section. Listen to the isolated drum track. Pay attention in particular to the snare drum. This switch...
the original snare drum sounds muffled, and the newer snare drum sounds ringy.
This switch seems to indicate that not only was this latter part overdubbed, it may have been recorded in multiple segments and stitched together.
What do you mean?
And here's where the debate comes in. Some fans argue that this wilder, overdubbed part is in fact played by Ringo, not.
Yo, it does sound like Ringo playing. It has that swampy feel that he does.
This wilder, overdubbed part is in fact played by Ringo, not by Paul. The proponents of the Ringo theory claim that this end section wasn't something that Paul could have played. They point to other examples in the Beatle catalog that bear a striking resemblance to Ringo's style, such as the end section of Strawberry Fields Forever, or the fills on Rain, or Blue Jay Way.
It does sound like Ringo. It really does. But the Beatles engineers were really good about keeping detailed notes about who played what. And it seems like they would know, you know?
There are different explanations proposed for how and why this might have happened. Some suggest that Ringo had already come back from his Mediterranean excursion by the end of the Trident sessions, dropping by surreptitiously to add some of his own flair to the track.
I don't think that's what happened. If that's what happened, we would have heard about it. You know, Ringo coming back to the band. Everyone knows the first thing he recorded was While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Everyone knows that, right?
Others claim that Ringo's part could have been added at some other point before the track was mixed at EMI Studios a few weeks later on October 13th. This debate among fans is not new either. I found conversations online as far back as the late 90s discussing this. The theory appears again and again on Beatle message boards, Reddit posts, and YouTube comments.
I have read that the drumming from the first two tracks of the White Album back in the USSR and Dear Prudence had Paul on drums. I refuse to accept this for Dear Prudence. The drumming sounds way too much like Ringo's, especially during the drum solo bit at the end. The fills and the licks are trademark Ringo. It's true, it sounds very Ringo. Anyone who thinks that Paul was on drums at the end doesn't have a critical ear. Damn, that's 100% Ringo. I don't care what anyone says, those fills are Ringo's. They were dubbed in. Maybe. That is Ringo in the overdubs. I have no doubt now that I can hear it clearly. If it is not, then Paul was doing a damn fine Ringo impersonation. Don't underestimate Paul McCartney, though. That's something I've learned. The drumming at the end is surely classic Ringo, what Abe Laboriel Jr. called that sloppy, swampy, falling down the stairs kind of sound. It is. It's comparable to, say, Blue Jay Way or Hello Goodbye. Nobody sounds like that. Maka's style is more careful and measured, as heard on Back in the USSR, and other tracks by him mentioned before. Yeah. Ringo had a swampy thing, like behind the beat. I'm convinced that Ringo played the last bit of the song. Sounds like Paul started it out and Ringo finished it.
In 2018, Dear Prudence was remixed for the White Album Deluxe Edition by Giles Martin. Also included on the box set was a new stripped-down mix that featured only the drum track and John's vocals and rhythm guitar.
I didn't see that.
It's neat to hear this simplified version, but because it's only a remix of the existing tracks, it doesn't definitively give us an answer either way as to who's playing the drums. Ultimately, the various explanations for the Ringo theory simply don't have any evidence to support them. If Ringo had shown up at the Trident sessions after his Greek vacation, there probably would be some record of this momentous return, either in recollections or documentation. And there's no evidence that the 8-track tape received any further instrumental overdubs after it left Trident. As for the claim that Paul wasn't capable of playing this part, that premise is easily challenged too with some clear counterexamples. In addition to his drum contributions on Back in the USSR, Martha My Dear, and the Ballad of John and Yoko, Paul also has a long and respectable list of drum credits following his Beatle days, including on his first solo album, McCartney, and throughout the Wings album, Band on the Run. Other musicians have even invited him to play on their own songs, such as on Steve Miller's My Dark Hour, and more recently on the Foo Fighters' Sunday Rain. So Paul certainly could have pulled this off in 1968, especially using Trident's 8-track recorder to help add and substitute parts.
Y'all, Paul and Ringo are both still around. Why doesn't someone ask them this? Why is this a mystery, you know? Seems like they might remember, unless they were, partying.
If you thought Dear Prudence featured Ringo on drums, you're certainly not alone. I also used to assume this was the case. After all, it has all the hallmarks of Ringo's style, which no doubt served as an inspiration for Paul's approach here. Funnily enough, even the Beatles' Rock Band shows Ringo on the drum set.
Well,
what do you think?
I wouldn't reference Rock Band as a definitive definition of definitive things of a definition.
Is this Paul, or is it really Ringo? Let me know in the comments.
I think it's Paul.
As with many of these debates, the truth isn't nearly as interesting to me as the debate itself. Despite having individual talents and personalities, they were able to emulate each other's styles and create a cohesive sound. Thanks to this, Dear Prudence still has an unquestionably Beatle vibe, even if it doesn't feature all 4 Beatles. As for the song itself, there is some ineffable quality about Dear Prudence that has hooked me ever since I first heard it. Everything in the song simply works, as it slowly builds from a gentle, delicate lullaby, adding layers along the way until that transcendent climax, all in less than 4 minutes. I even love its ironic placement on the White Album, coming right off the rocking, tongue-in-cheek opener Back in the USSR, dropping us from 30,000 feet into this incredibly different tone and mood. If the White Album was about subverting expectations, it's hard to imagine a more fitting 2-song sequence to have kicked it off, or to have wrapped it up, with the 2 last songs on the album, Revolution 9 and Good Night, also curiously missing Ringo's drumming. Maybe a nod to his brief absence during the sessions, or just a funny coincidence. Even on its own, Dear Prudence is a widely beloved masterpiece, regularly covered by other artists, and often ranked high on Beatle fan lists. And even though it wasn't a hit single or a song that regularly gets airplay, it holds a very special place in the hearts of many Beatles fans, this one included. As always, please subscribe if you haven't already, and thanks for listening.
Y'all be sure to go to You Can't Unhear This and like and subscribe. Y'all, let's not discount the beauty of the bass line of this song. It is gorgeous. What an advantage to have one of the most beautiful melodic minds of the 20th century to be playing bass guitar on your songs. You know? Such an advantage. Y'all be sure to go to You Can't Unhear This and like and subscribe. And if you made it this far in the video, maybe give me a like and subscribe, you know what I'm saying? Maybe get a coffee mug, tea mug, whatever kind of mug. I think it's Paul, y'all. I think Paul could play that. I don't know, though. It's so swampy. It sounds like Paul after a couple pints, you know? Y'all, am I about to go listen to the White Album again for the 1900 millionth time? I think I am. Check out that 2018 remix. It's beautiful. It adds a nice modern fidelity. It's great. Giles Martin is very talented. Runs in the genes. Well, thank y'all for watching this with me. Thank you. Oh, wait. Thanks to my patrons on Patreon. Thanks to my Buy Me a Coffee people. Thank y'all for watching this with me, and I'll see you next time.